right near the end of the book, you're down in the Mekong Delta, and you're out in the river a bit, and you describe a day. I think you say this was sort of, the most remarkable day or the most depressing day. I forget exactly what you say.
Both.
But yeah. So could you tell us about this day? You're down in the Delta. What this day kind of summarizes for you. You used the phrase was a total farce, what you saw. And it seems like this day kind of summarizes for you the maybe you don't like this word, sort of the futility of what's happening in South Vietnam. Could you describe that day for us? What you saw that
Well,
day?
it was first thing about it was a surprise. My superior, in the chief of the refugee division, had obtained a relationship with a man named Phan Quan Dong, who was the Minister of State of the GVN. Now, he was by far the most popular Vietnamese to Americans, absolutely by far. He was the one we could get along with, which means, of course, he had absolutely no chance of getting any power in the GVN. But he was, one of the things he was sent to do would be make these little dog and pony show visits. And I went on a couple of them with him. And because, you see, although he was, technically like the fourth ranking officer or something of the GVN, he couldn't procure an Air America aircraft. Only an American could do that. So Americans had to escort or be with him. And my superior really didn't like to do this as much. And so he would occasionally send me. And he sent me this morning, complete surprise. I had no idea what was going on. He just said, get out to the airport, find Dr. Don, we're going in a plane. And so I did. And this was one of my few trips down in the Delta. I really don't know the Delta very much. I never did learn it. To this, and even that very first day, I didn't know where we went. I don't know what provinces we ended up in. It was just around and around and around. Now, our first stop, for example, this was the flood season down in the Delta. And so the entire province that we went to was underwater, but for special areas that had been built up. And for villages, for example, or the administrative headquarters. And now, coming as someone from the Central Highlands, who were used to mountains, I'm looking out and all I see is water. As far as the eye can see. And so we were there primarily to try to raise the morale of this one province, because sometime before, and I never learned exactly when, the province headquarters had been overrun and the province chief had been killed. Now, this would have been a bad thing if it had been done by the VC or the NBA, but it had been done by the ARVN unit assigned to protect the province.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
The ARVN commander and the province chief were drinking cognac, playing poker, lost their temper at each other. The province chief threw the ARVN commander out of it. The ARVN got some of his soldiers, came back and killed people. Okay, and so I stayed out of the way. This was none of my business. I was just there because we had the airplane. So we did some sort of talking about that. Then we got back in helicopters this time, because the only way to get around the province for any sort of distance was helicopters. We flew for lunch at a Catholic church on one of these villages that is built up on stilts out of the ground. The village itself is laid out in a cross shape. Okay, and all of the front of the buildings were on the ground and all the rear were on pilings over the water, including the church. And I remember having lunch there, there was nothing special. We were having lunch, and there I see what looks like an American sitting next to the priest, okay, the head of the local village. And I'm not really close to them, but I can sort of hear them talking. And as I listen, I cannot figure out what language they're talking. It's not English, it's not French, it's not Vietnamese, and it wasn't Chinese. And so I had no idea. And there was an officer of the MACV team sitting next to me. And I said, what's going on over here? He said, okay, that's our pet priest. He said, he just showed up here one day. Now, this is unusual because the Catholics, since they ran the country, had a very organized relief effort. But this guy, apparently, for reasons we never found out, just decided to go to Vietnam, answer a calling, showed up. He met this priest who sort of took him in.
Now, and he was American, right? He'd come from
America. Yeah. He only spoke English. And the priest did not speak any English, but they communicated in Latin.
Wow. Yeah.
And I sat there thinking about my Latin teacher in high school who had said, Latin is not a dead language, it's a living language.
Yeah.
There it was.
So I mean, so this is there's a lot of things going on this day. And One of them is that this American priest had apparently decided on his own to go to South Vietnam. Here he is in the Delta, communicating with the Vietnamese priests in Latin. Right? That's the common language they have. So that's one interesting thing that happens on this day.
Well, that after the lunch, we then went out to a district headquarters, which again, everything was underwater, but we actually landed on a floating pad in a helicopter. This was an Arvin helicopter, by the way, that we were flying in, which made me a little bit nervous because they didn't have a really great reputation, both for maintenance, and they were all good pilots, but they were still a shaky type of thing. And we went to the district headquarters. We met the district advisor, and he and the district chief got into boats, little basic rowboats with outboard motors, which is the only way you could get around. And so he took off, and we took off after him. We all got in a couple of boats, and the Americans were following the Vietnamese in the lead boat. And as we're sailing along, I had to remember that the water is only a few feet deep at that point. Okay, it's not that much, but so. It is only their part of the year. So we kept passing a lot of Vietnamese in sampans, those little low-lying boats that are out there. Now, something that meant a lot to me, the province chief, the Vietnamese, he would roar right past them, full speed, wake going, didn't care whether he upset the sampan or not. When the American went by them, we would drop to no wake speed, go by, and then go fast again. That was a telling metaphor to me about the attitude of the GBN towards its people. Now, after that little lesson, we ended up going to a fire base, a very small fire base. And it was actually 3 round circles of land that had been raised up above the high level of the water. On 2 of those circles sat howitzers. The third was where the men lived, their quarters. And around each howitzer was a semicircle of boxes, wooden boxes, holding the shells for the howitzer, which didn't strike me as a good thing to kind of cower behind if you were being attacked.
Right.
And some B40 wire fence out in the distance from not too far away from the place. But the point was, of course, it was indefensible. There was no way they could possibly defend. Now, attacking in the rainy season would have been hard, but they just weren't set up for defense. That was because they weren't planned to defend themselves. They were there to support by artillery other fire support bases within range. And they, in turn, were to be supported by the other fire support bases. It was a very typical American interlocking, complicated system. Now, the problem is we did this in the Delta. And so when the rainy season came, we had to shift howitzers. We would carry the 155s in the dry season and then fly by helicopter them out, fly 105s in and switch the ammunition. Well, when I got there, this being the rainy season, there were 2 105 howitzers there and 2 boxes as revetments around the howitzers. And as I mentioned, I was standing there next to a brigadier general who I really wish I could remember his name. He deserves to be remembered. Who looked at me and said, "Do you notice anything strange about those boxes?" I'm a civilian. I don't really know. And he points out to me that all of the shells in those boxes are for 155 millimeter howitzers. They switched the howitzers, but not the shells. Those guns couldn't fire. The people who depended on them for support weren't going to get it. What about others? Did that happen in other ways? Was the support for this particular base inoperable also? Okay, we set up a situation that required them twice a year to helicopter howitzers in and out of a difficult place. And they couldn't do it.
It couldn't happen. And it gets back to the theme of there's the appearance and then there's the reality. And you actually look at what's happening and it doesn't work, right? This isn't going to work.
But nobody says anything. The entire event went off as planned. Dr. Don talked to the soldiers and made a little speech and inspected the place. And the fact that it was totally inoperable never came up.
You could write a report that would make things sound like everything's looking good, but the reality is, it's not. You're describing a day that really could be the stuff of an Apocalypse Now kind of movie. Just to rehearse the story that 2 officers in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, had gotten into a squabble, which had then led to soldiers attacking and killing one of the officers, right? And some of the officers' men, if I have that correct. So that makes you uncomfortable because these folks are supposed to be on the same team. Then you've got this kind of surreal experience of an American priest who's just apparently kind of parachuted into South Vietnam, communicating with his Vietnamese fellow priest in Latin. You've got this instance where South Vietnamese officials are hustling through the Mekong Delta with these big wakes, and sometimes then overturning the sampans that the Vietnamese are in, a clear sign of disregard for the well-being of those Vietnamese. The Americans, you're describing Americans will slow down so that the wake won't overturn the sampans. But it makes you wonder, well, when we leave, if this indicates how the officials feel about the folks in the sampans, how is this going to work out? And then you describe this situation where we have this complicated defense system that's just not going to work because the weapon we have here and the ammunition we have don't fit. And do I have all that right? So I mean, all of this correct, together, yeah. This is all of this comes at you in a single day.
In one day.
And so when you look back on that day, what impact did that day have on you then? What impact does it have on you now as you think back on it?
Well, it had an impact only in the sense that it deepened by that time I was already sure of, that this whole message was futile, whether we were going to lose or they were going to lose after we left.